Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Today we're talking about conflicts of interest in healthcare. There are about four or five major interests in conflicts of interest in healthcare, and I have some notes to refer to here, but I want to go through the government, I want to go through universities, I want to go through corporations, and I want to go through doctors and medical schools. Because it isn't really the doctors, it's the medical schools and the medical institutions that do this, and they're all really in bed with each other. First, the government. If you're not aware of this, the FDA has been a revolving door with industry in that a lot of people end up heading high-level positions in the FDA for 2 years, and then they go into industry for 2 years, and then they go back to FDA for 2 years, and then they go back to industry for 2 years, and they end up getting escalating pay as they go. And when they retire, they end up advising both sides. It's a very difficult problem of conflict of interest. Further, the FDA has nearly 50% of its revenue now coming from industry directly, and it used to be federally funded. But now they've created over the last few decades this shift, this slide toward having half their income come from the industry itself. And so that is a conflict of interest. The CDC especially owns patents on materials and intellectual property that is a conflict of interest with the U.S. taxpayer. There are two CDCs. One is a private organization, and the other one, a mirror of it, a sister organization, is a nonprofit. And so when people claim that the CDC is a for-profit organization, others will come in and say, no, it's a nonprofit. Well, there are two. There are two. It is both. There are both arms of the organization, and a number of the people in the National Institutes of Health, Public Health Service, the NIH, the FDA, the CDC, all own patents on intellectual property that is used in various medicines and vaccines that are given to the American public at the expense of the taxpayer. And these are usually, in large part, the pilot research for them is paid for by tax-paying money. And so this is a conflict of interest, and it needs to be reformed. The next one is the universities. You may not be aware of this, but there are a number of university papers and a number of journals that have been bought and paid for by industry and by government agencies that decide they have an agenda that they want to prefer. And if they put forth this agenda, the papers are ghostwritten by industry and then other names are put on them, or the scientists are paid special interest money to write the biased papers. The data is obscured and not released. The data is hidden and kept secret. In fact, if you own a proprietary product and you do research on it, and you decide that you don't want to reveal that research, the laws are such that you can keep that information separate as a corporation and only disclose it with the FDA and not publish it and not expose it to the rest of the world so that your competitors can see it. Now, I can see how that's a necessary evil for competition and intellectual property, but the difficulty is that there is no sunset clause. There's never a time when it finally has to be released, because that information that corporations might make when they study a vaccine or a drug is such that they may learn something that would be useful for the rest of us. And especially if that's paid for by tax money, that's a conflict of interest. So we really need to be able to get hold of the raw data for all of the studies, even the ones that are not released and not published, even the ones that show adverse effects or no effects. All of those studies need to be released to the public at some point. There needs to be some sunset clause so that we can get it. Further, a famous scientist called John Ioannidis, just a hero of mine, published research showing that most of our studies are worthless, that we have been improperly studying phenomena in the world of drugs and the world of science. Now, that doesn't say that we should throw out all science. It doesn't mean to say that just because a lot of recent papers have been crappily done means that all science is bad. There are ways to design science and experiments very, very well, and you're taught that in school when you go into the research side of science. Now, I'm a clinician. I don't do research for a living. I'm a clinician, so I'm not part of that world as much as others. But there have been scientists like Karl Popper and Carl Pfeiffer, these are two different Karls, that have over the years described through the 20th century, the 1900s, described what make the best kind of research and what is called falsifiable research, where you provide a theory that you can discount. And if you can disprove that theory, then you've done something real in science and you've contributed in science. So research papers are not necessarily as valuable, and there isn't a whole lot of research that's reliable according to Ioannidis. So we need to look at the corporations. Corporations in these days seem to be in bed with government agencies, and they capture these government agencies by, again, paying for the government approval and stamps of approval. It's gotten so bad that in the United States, the courts have had to order the EPA and FDA to look at different chemical toxins in the environment and reevaluate whether something is safe, like, for example, glyphosate and certain other drugs. There are a number of drugs that need to be evaluated. There's a big battle on fluoride going on right now. There's a lot of stuff happening in the United States where lobbyists from corporations are able to lobby governments, and they're able to lobby our legislators. They're able to get laws changed and passed that allow no accountability financially for manufacturers of certain products. And they're able to advertise on TV and advertise in magazines in ways that we never were allowed to before in the United States, as well as in other countries. You're still not allowed to do those things. Only in the United States are you allowed to do that. We also aren't allowed to negotiate for drug prices with Medicare. Medicare is not allowed to negotiate for drug prices with the pharmaceutical companies. Does that seem a little crazy to you? And then lastly, the medical schools. There was a bunch of reports that have been published since around 1910 till now that go through and describe, I won't name all of them, but they're reports that have been published explaining how medical schools and the medical industrial complex really tried to take over the care of teaching doctors and certifying who is a real doctor, and then putting them in hospitals and paying for their education and all this stuff from about 1910, 1911 onward. And there was also a very famous medical case called Wilk et al. Versus AMA. And Wilk was Chester Wilk, a chiropractor who sued the American Medical Association with a bunch of chiropractors and won. And this was back in the 1980s. And this was a case where in federal court, Justice Susan Getzendanner ruled that the medical profession had been engaged in a scheme to control and eliminate, was the legal language that she used, to control and eliminate the professions of chiropractic and homeopathy and essentially midwifery and dentistry when it was holistic and whole body dentistry, and osteopathy and a whole bunch of other professions like naturopathy and naprapathy. These are other professions that you may or may not have heard of. So this precedent exists, and they still haven't paid the damages from that case. The American Medical Association has still not paid the damages from that case. The American Medical Association is a trade union. It is not a government association. It is not answerable to the taxpayers. It is a private trade association, which is not a bad thing in itself. There are many private trade associations that I admire, like the Natural Products Association, which used to be the Natural Foods Association. There are other groups that are not government agencies that are private trade groups, and they're very good. There's lots of them. I like the American Chiropractic Association and the International Chiropractic Association. These are not government organizations. They're just trade associations. There are other groups that are not government agencies that do a great job. But the American Medical Association controls foreign medical school training. It restricts people that get medical school training in a foreign country, and they have to go through exorbitant tests and years of education and go back to school to be a real doctor in the United States. They also control who has access to hospitals, and they control the number of medical candidates that make it into medical school. And so they artificially restrict the supply of doctors, making and artificially inflating access and price of doctoring in the United States, for medical doctors at least. Now, I'm a chiropractor, so I'm not subject to that. But this is a real problem. So we've got government, universities, corporations, and medical schools and associations that have conflicts of interest in healthcare. And if we really want to have control of our economy, one of the big pieces that we can do is take a look at healthcare and all of its pieces and look at reform in healthcare in the United States.